Now Cartesian coordinate system for the complex plane. Now we are going to talk about the complex plane for the Cartesian coordinate system. There you go for the complex plane. It is the complex plane. This is the origin, which is represented by 0. It is the origin of the complex plane. This vertical line is the imaginary axis. This vertical blue line is the imaginary axis. This vertical blue line is the imaginary axis. This horizontal line is the real axis. This light gray horizontal line is the real axis. If you compare the complex plane with the xy plane, for the xy plane we have x-axis here. It is represented by the x and x prime. And this vertical blue line was the y-axis, like y and y prime. But in complex plane, this horizontal line is the real axis. This vertical blue line is the imaginary axis. Look on the right side of the 0, which is the origin. The real axis is represented by r with the positive values. On the left of the 0, it is represented by r prime with the negative values for the real axis. Above the 0, this horizontal line is represented by I with the positive values along y-axis. Below the 0, this line is represented by I prime with the negative values for imaginary axis. This is my first quadrant, here is my second quadrant, this is my third quadrant, and here is the fourth quadrant. In the first quadrant we have a plus b iota. In the second quadrant we have negative a positive b iota. In the second quadrant we have negative a plus b iota. In the third quadrant we have negative a negative b iota. In the fourth quadrant we have positive a negative b iota. Since we are talking about the complex plane, in the complex plane we are taking complex number. Look, in xy plane we had x and y. Negative x, positive y. Negative x, negative y. Positive x, negative y. But for the complex plane we have complex number. This a is like x. This b iota is like y. Positive a, positive b. Similarly, this negative a is like negative x in xy plane. It is like negative x, positive y in xy plane. Similarly here, we have negative a, negative b iota. It is exactly like negative x, negative y in xy plane. In the fourth quadrant, we have positive a, negative b. It is like positive x, negative y in the xy plane. So in xy plane, we had xy. In complex plane we have AB, but make sure B has iota. This A is my real part. It is the value along this horizontal line, which is the real axis. It is the value along the real axis in complex plane. That's why we call it the real part. This B iota is the imaginary part. Look, we know that the number with the iota is the imaginary number. Since b has iota, therefore this is the imaginary number. This is the value along this vertical blue line. It is the imaginary axis. This is the imaginary axis. So this imaginary value is represented along the imaginary axis. On the right of the 0, this a is the positive value along real axis. Above 0, this b iota is the positive value along imaginary axis. Similarly, on the left of the 0, this negative a is the negative value along negative real axis. This positive b iota is the value along positive real axis. This positive b iota is the value along positive imaginary axis. In the third quadrant, we have negative a and negative b iota, which means that on the left of the 0, we have negative a. The value of real axis is in negative. Below the 0, the value of imaginary axis is also in negative. In the fourth quadrant, the value of x-axis is in positive. Below the 0, this imaginary part is the negative. I hope you got the idea now about the complex plane for the Cartesian coordinate system.